Hello everyone. Looking back, I can see the cracks that started to form long before the foundation of my marriage shattered. My name's Ethan. I've been married to Claire for 12 years. We have a son, Jake, who just turned 10. If you asked me a year ago, I would have said our life was pretty normal: work, school, soccer practice, weekends spent shuttling between games and family outings. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I thought we were solid. I thought we were a team. But now, standing at the edge of the wreckage, I realize how blind I was to the signs that had been there all along. That it started with little things. Claire began spending more time at Jake's soccer practices, volunteering to help with snacks, organizing car pools, and chatting with the other parents. At first, I didn't think much of it. Jake loved soccer, and Claire had always been involved in his activities. But as the weeks went by, her enthusiasm seemed to shift. She started dressing differently: more fitted tops, new jeans, makeup that seemed a little too perfect for a Saturday morning on the sidelines. I noticed the way her eyes lingered on her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, her fingers moving quickly across the screen before she'd tuck it away with a practiced smile. The distance between us began to grow in ways I couldn't quite put into words. Our conversations became shorter, filled with the logistics of daily life: who would pick up Jake from practice, what time his game started, whether we had enough groceries for the week. The warmth that had once defined our relationship seemed to slip through my fingers like sand, leaving behind a sense of unease I couldn't shake. That I first noticed the change during one of Jake's weekend games. I had arrived late from work, my tie still loosened around my collar as I made my way to the sidelines. Claire stood a few feet ahead, laughing at something the coach had said. His name was Coach Ryan, a tall, broad-shouldered guy in his late 30s with an easy smile and a way of commanding attention without raising his voice. The kids loved him. The parents respected him. And Claire seemed drawn to him in a way that sent a cold twist of something I didn't want to name curling in my chest. That I tried to brush it off as jealousy, the irrational kind that creeps up when you see your partner smiling just a little too brightly at someone else. But as the weeks went on, the feeling only grew stronger. Claire started staying later after practices, always with an excuse: helping Ryan clean up the equipment, discussing the team schedule, making sure Jake got extra practice time. I told myself it was all for Jake's sake. I wanted to believe that. But doubt has a way of taking root, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the seeds had already been planted. One night, I woke up to find the bed beside me empty. The soft glow of Claire's phone illuminated the hallway as she stood just outside the bedroom, her fingers tapping out a message with a focus that sent a chill down my spine. I didn't say anything. I just watched as she finished typing, her shoulders relaxing slightly as the message sent. She slipped back into bed a few minutes later, her back turned toward me as she pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But the doubt wouldn't let me sleep. The following week, I decided to leave work early and surprise Jake at practice. I told myself it was just to watch my son play, to see him dribbling the ball down the field, his eyes lit with determination as he chased after his dreams. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the only reason. As I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted Claire's car parked near the field. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the grass as the kids chased the ball from one end of the field to the other. I scanned the sidelines, searching for Claire among the other parents, but she wasn't there. My pulse quickened as I made my way around the field, the distant shouts of the kids blending into the hum of blood in my ears. As I rounded the far side of the field, my gaze fell on the equipment shed near the edge of the property. The door stood slightly ajar, a faint sliver of light spilling out onto the grass. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer, the air thick with the weight of unspoken suspicions. I could hear faint voices inside, low, muffled, but unmistakably familiar. Claire's laugh, soft and breathless, sent a cold rush of adrenaline through my veins. I stood frozen outside the door, my mind racing through 1,000 possibilities as I strained to make sense of what I was hearing. The words were indistinct, but the tone, the warmth in her voice, the easy familiarity of their exchange told me everything I needed to know. My fingers curled into fists at my sides as I fought the urge to push open the door, to demand answers that I already knew would break me. But something held me back, some last shred of hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. The sound of footsteps approaching from behind made me step back from the shed, my pulse hammering in my chest as I turned to see Jake running toward me, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad! Did you see my goal?" His eyes shone with pride, oblivious to the storm raging just beneath the surface of my skin. I forced a smile, swallowing the lump in my throat as I clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Yeah, buddy. I saw. You did great." But even as I said the words, my gaze drifted back toward the shed, where the faint glow of light still spilled out onto the grass. The laughter had faded into silence, but the echoes of what I had heard lingered in the air, a whisper of something I couldn't unhear. That night, I lay awake long after Claire had fallen asleep beside me, the rise and fall of her breath a reminder of the distance that now stretched between us. The questions circled in my mind like vultures, picking at the edges of my sanity with relentless precision. How long had this been going on? How had I missed the signs? And most of all, what was I going to do now? Because no matter how much I wanted to deny it, one thing was clear: the life I thought I knew was already slipping through my fingers. And the worst part was, I had no idea how much more there was still to uncover. The days that followed were a blur of half-finished thoughts and restless nights. Sleep became a distant memory, each hour stretching longer than the last as my mind circled back to that moment by the equipment shed. The sound of Claire's laughter echoed through my thoughts like a ghost I couldn't escape. Every glance, every word, every late-night text that lit up her phone now carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Yet, despite the storm of doubt raging inside me, I said nothing. Maybe it was fear of hearing the truth, fear of what that truth would mean for our family. Or maybe it was hope, the fragile hope that I was wrong, that there was still a chance to piece together the life we had built before it all fell apart. But hope can only hold back the tide for so long. That it was a Friday evening when the cracks in the facade finally began to splinter beyond repair. Jake had fallen asleep early, worn out from a week of school and soccer practice. Claire sat beside me on the couch, her phone resting in her lap as she scrolled through her messages with the same careful attention that had become all too familiar. The faint glow of the screen reflected in her eyes, masking the expression that flickered across her face with each new notification. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the muted television as if the images flickering across the screen could drown out the questions pounding in my chest. But then her phone buzzed again, soft, but loud enough to cut through the silence between us. Her fingers moved quickly, swiping the notification away before I could see the name attached to it. The air seemed to shift, thickening with the unspoken tension that had become our constant companion. I watched as she stood, her movements quick and deliberate as she slipped her phone into her pocket. "I'm going to take a shower," she said, her voice light, too casual. I nodded without looking at her, the familiar ache settling deeper in my chest as she disappeared down the hallway. The sound of the bathroom door closing echoed through the quiet house, followed by the faint rush of water as the shower turned on, and then, as if guided by some invisible force, my gaze drifted to the place where she had been sitting. Her laptop lay open on the coffee table, the screen dark but not locked. My pulse quickened, the air suddenly too thick to breathe as I leaned forward, my fingers hesitating just above the keyboard. 1,000 thoughts collided in my mind, questions of trust, of boundaries, of what I might find if I crossed the line that separated suspicion from certainty. But the weight of doubt was too heavy to ignore, and before I could stop myself, I tapped the touchpad, bringing the screen to life. The email inbox appeared first, innocuous, filled with the usual mix of work correspondence and promotional newsletters. But it was the messaging app icon that drew my gaze, a faint notification dot pulsing like a heartbeat against the screen. My breath caught in my throat as I clicked it open, the messages loading with a speed that seemed almost merciless, and there it was: "Ryan, can't stop thinking about yesterday. Same time next week." The air seemed to leave my lungs in a single, shuddering exhale. My fingers gripped the edge of the coffee table as my eyes scanned the conversation that followed. Short, clipped messages exchanged late at night, each one a thread woven into the tapestry of betrayal that now lay bare before me. Claire, you're terrible. Someone's going to catch us one of these days, Ryan, only if we're not careful. But I think you like the risk, don't you, Claire? Maybe. Or maybe I just like the way you look at me when no one else is watching. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the faint hum of the television and the distant rush of water from the bathroom. The room seemed to tilt beneath me, the air too thick, too heavy to pull into my lungs. My eyes traced the messages again and again, as if rereading them might somehow change the words that burned into my mind. But no amount of denial could rewrite what I had seen. The truth was there, in black and white, undeniable and unchangeable. Claire was having an affair with our son's soccer coach. I sat frozen, the laptop screen casting a pale glow across my face as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My thoughts chased themselves in endless circles, each question colliding with the next until they blurred into a single, unanswerable why. Why him? Why now? Why had she chosen to tear apart the life we had built together for the sake of stolen moments that could never be more than a secret? The sound of the shower turning off jolted me from my thoughts. Panic surged through my veins as I closed the laptop, my hands moving on instinct as I pushed it back to where it had been. The distant creak of the bathroom door echoed down the hallway, each footstep growing louder as Claire approached. I forced myself to breathe, my chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven gasps as I scrambled to erase any trace of what I had seen. By the time she entered the living room, towel wrapped around her shoulders and hair damp from the shower, I had managed to school my features into something resembling calm. But the air between us crackled with the weight of unspoken truths, the invisible line that separated suspicion from certainty now crossed with no way to turn back. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes searching mine for a moment before shifting away. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone light but cautious. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face tightening beneath the strain of holding back the words that burned in my throat. "Yeah. Just tired," I replied, my voice hollow to my own ears. She nodded, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before she turned away, disappearing down the hallway without another word. The faint creak of the bedroom door closing was the only sound that broke the silence that followed, leaving me alone in the living room with nothing but the echo of her laughter and the weight of the truth that had shattered the world I thought I knew. That night, I lay awake long after the house had fallen silent, the rise and fall of Claire's breath beside me a reminder of the distance that now stretched between us. Sleep remained elusive, each attempt to close my eyes met with the image of her messages, the words etched into my mind with relentless clarity. "Can't stop thinking about yesterday." The phrase looped through my thoughts like a broken record, each repetition another blow to the fragile hope that had kept me standing until now. The life I had built, the family I had fought to protect, it all stood on the brink of collapse, teetering on the edge of a choice that was no longer mine to make. But as the first light of dawn crept through the window, casting pale shadows across the walls, one thought rose above the chaos that churned within me: this wasn't over, not yet. The air felt heavier the next morning as I moved through the house, every step echoing with the weight of what I now knew. The messages between Claire and Ryan replayed in my mind like a broken record, each word carving deeper into the hollow ache that had settled in my chest. I moved on autopilot, packing Jake's lunch, pouring coffee, nodding along to his chatter about the weekend soccer game as if the world hadn't shifted beneath my feet. Claire sat across from me at the table, scrolling through her phone with the same distracted focus that had become all too familiar. Every glance she stole at the screen, every faint smile that flickered across her lips felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to tear the phone from her hands, demand to know how she could sit there so calmly while the life we had built together crumbled beneath us. But the words caught in my throat, heavy and unspoken, choking on the fear of what would come next. I waited until Jake had left for school, the sound of the front door closing behind him echoing through the silent house like a gunshot. Claire stood by the sink, rinsing out her coffee mug with slow, deliberate movements, as if prolonging the moment might stave off the confrontation she must have sensed was coming. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stepped toward her, the air between us thick with the weight of all the words we had yet to say. "I know about you and Ryan." The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable, and for a moment, the only sound was the faint drip of water from the faucet. Claire's shoulders stiffened, her hand tightening around the mug as if it might anchor her against the storm that had just broken over us. Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes wide with something that might have been shock or guilt or maybe just the fear of being caught. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice quick, too quick, the denial falling from her lips with practiced ease. My breath came shallow and fast as I stepped closer, the air between us crackling with the tension of 1,000 unspoken truths. "Don't lie to me. I saw the messages. I know what's been going on." Her eyes darted away, her lips pressing into a thin line as if she could hold back the truth through sheer force of will. But the silence between us spoke louder than any words could. "How long?" My voice broke on the question, raw and unfiltered, stripped of any pretense or restraint. Claire's gaze flicked back to mine, the conflict in her eyes clear even as she clung to the last threads of denial. "It's not what you think," she said, the words falling flat against the weight of what I had seen. "Nothing happened, it was just messages." Don't," I cut her off, the sharp edge of my voice slicing through her excuses like a blade. "I saw enough to know exactly what it was." The air in the room seemed to press against my chest, heavy with the weight of shattered trust and broken promises. Claire's shoulders sagged as the last vestiges of denial slipped away, leaving only the raw truth that neither of us could escape. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said at last, her voice a whisper against the silence that stretched between us. "I never meant for it to go this far." My breath came in ragged gasps as I fought to hold back the surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. Anger, sorrow, disbelief, they collided within me in a storm of questions that had no answers. "Why?" The word slipped from my lips before I could stop it, the need to understand outweighing the fear of what her answer might be. Claire's eyes searched mine for a long moment, as if searching for the right words in a language neither of us knew how to speak. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice cracking beneath the weight of the confession. "I was lost. And Ryan, he made me feel seen, like I mattered in a way I hadn't felt in a long time." The words hit harder than I expected, sharp and unrelenting in their honesty. My breath caught in my throat as the ground beneath my feet seemed to shift once more, the foundation of everything I had believed in crumbling beneath the weight of her choices. "And what about Jake?" The question emerged raw and unfiltered, the thought of our son caught in the crossfire of her betrayal slicing through the haze of my own pain. Claire's eyes filled with tears, her shoulders trembling as the weight of her actions seemed to settle over her all at once. "I never wanted to hurt him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or you. I didn't know how to stop once it started." The room seemed to close in around us, the walls echoing with the ghosts of a life we could no longer reclaim. I turned away, the air too thick to breathe, my hands trembling at my sides as the full weight of what I had lost settled into my chest. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence between us heavier than any words could ever be. And in that silence, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the house became suffocating after the confrontation. Every room echoed with the weight of unspoken words, the air thick with a tension that seemed to press against my chest no matter where I stood. Claire moved through the space like a shadow present but distant, her footsteps barely registering against the hardwood floors. I found myself avoiding the places where our paths might cross, each encounter a reminder of the betrayal that now defined the air between us. Even the familiar hum of the refrigerator or the distant murmur of traffic outside couldn't drown out the questions that chased each other through my mind. Sleep became an impossible luxury. Each night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in from all sides as my thoughts circled endlessly through the events of the past few weeks. The messages I had read played on repeat behind my closed eyes, each word etched into my memory with a clarity that refused to fade. The images that accompanied those words, Claire leaning too close to Ryan on the sidelines, her laughter mingling with his in a way that seemed to vibrate through my bones, looped through my thoughts until they became more real than the shadows that stretched across the walls. The sound of her phone vibrating in the dead of night echoed through my memory, each buzz a reminder of the moments that had slipped through my fingers without my knowing. During the day, I moved through life with the mechanical precision of someone operating on autopilot. I drove Jake to school, packed his lunches, attended his soccer games with a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else. I watched from the sidelines as he darted across the field, his laughter ringing out above the distant cheer of parents and the sharp whistle of the referee. But even those moments, once so full of pride and joy, now carried the weight of what had been stolen from us. Each glance at the coach stirred a mix of anger and sorrow that burned beneath my skin, a constant reminder of the invisible line that had been crossed without my knowledge. At work, my focus wavered, the hum of conversation and the clatter of keyboards fading into the background as my thoughts drifted toward the questions that had no answers. How long had this been going on? How many nights had Claire sat beside me with her phone in hand, her fingers tapping out messages meant for someone else? The weight of those questions settled into my bones, each one heavier than the last. Colleagues passed by with polite smiles and half-hearted greetings, their words sliding past me without registering. Even the buzz of my own phone in my pocket, once a tether to the world outside, now felt like a distant echo of a life that no longer belonged to me. Weekends were the hardest. The house, once filled with the sound of Jake's laughter and the quiet hum of shared routines, now seemed to amplify the space between us. I watched Claire from a distance, noting the way her gaze flicked toward her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the tension in her shoulders when the air grew too heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. Each glance in my direction carried an unspoken question, one neither of us was ready to answer. The walls seemed to press closer with each passing day, the space between us shrinking until every breath felt like a struggle to escape the invisible ties that still bound us together. I found myself retreating more and more to the backyard, the faint rustle of leaves and distant hum of traffic offering a brief respite from the tension inside. The cool air seemed to cut through the fog that had settled in my mind, though it did little to ease the ache that had taken root beneath my ribs. I would stand beneath the fading light of the evening sky, my gaze fixed on the horizon, as if the answers I sought might somehow be waiting just beyond the edge of sight. But no matter how far I looked, the questions always followed. The memories of better days surfaced, unbidden moments when Claire's laughter had been mine to share, when the warmth of her hand in mine had felt like the most natural thing in the world. I remembered the day we had moved into this house, the way her eyes had lit up as we unpacked boxes and imagined the life we would build together. I remembered the late-night conversations that had stretched until dawn, the promises we had whispered beneath the cover of darkness, each one a thread woven into the fabric of our marriage. But those threads now lay frayed and broken, the foundation we had built reduced to fragments scattered at our feet. Yet, even as the weight of betrayal threatened to pull me under, a different emotion began to take root beneath the sorrow, a slow burning anger that coiled deep in my chest, tightening with each passing day. It wasn't the sharp, explosive rage that burned hot and fast, leaving destruction in its wake. This was something colder, heavier, a simmering resentment that settled into my bones and refused to be shaken loose. It whispered through my thoughts in the quiet moments when the world fell still, reminding me of the choices that had led us here and the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. I found myself questioning everything, every moment of the past year, every glance, every touch, every word that now seemed laced with hidden meaning. How had I not seen the signs? How had I missed the shift in her gaze, the distance in her touch, the hesitation in her laughter? The questions circled like vultures, picking apart the memories that had once brought comfort and leaving behind only fragments of doubt and regret. But beneath the anger, beneath the sorrow and confusion, a quieter voice began to emerge, a voice that asked not why this had happened, but what I would do next. The weight of betrayal was a burden I could not erase, but the choice of how to carry it was mine alone. I could remain trapped beneath the rubble of what had been lost, or I could begin to sift through the wreckage, searching for the pieces of myself that still remained intact. As the days passed, the fog in my mind began to clear, the sharp edges of grief giving way to a sense of clarity that had long eluded me. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with choices that would shape the future not just for me, but for Jake as well. The life we had built as a family could never be restored to what it once was, but the possibility of something new, something stronger still remained within reach, and as I stood beneath the pale light of the moon one evening, the distant hum of the city fading into the background, I took my first steady breath in what felt like weeks. The ache in my chest remained, a constant reminder of the wounds that would take time to heal. But beneath that ache, a flicker of determination began to take root, a resolve to move forward, to reclaim the pieces of my life that had been scattered in the wake of betrayal, because no matter how deeply the past had cut, the future was still mine to shape. The days that followed the confrontation passed in a haze of half-finished thoughts and restless nights. Each morning arrived with the same hollow ache in my chest, a weight that settled deeper with every breath. The house, once a place of warmth and laughter, now felt like a cage built from the remnants of a life that no longer existed. Every sound seemed to echo with the memory of what had been lost: the faint creak of the floorboards beneath Claire's footsteps, the distant hum of Jake's laughter drifting from his room, the soft murmur of the television that neither of us really watched anymore. Each moment a reminder of the choices that had led us to this point. That I moved through the days like a man walking through fog, my mind drifting between the present and the past with no clear sense of direction. The discovery of Claire's affair had fractured something deep within me, leaving behind jagged edges that cut into every thought and memory. I couldn't look at her without seeing the messages, without hearing the echo of her laughter mingled with Ryan's on the sidelines of Jake's soccer games. The knowledge of their stolen moments pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake, a constant reminder of the trust that had been broken beyond repair. At first, I tried to pretend that things might somehow return to normal, that if I kept moving forward, the pain would eventually fade into the background. But the illusion of normalcy was fragile, and each glance, each unspoken word, only served to deepen the chasm that had opened between us. Claire moved through the house with a careful distance, her presence a constant reminder of the choices she had made. Her eyes would meet mine in fleeting moments of shared silence, each glance heavy with the weight of everything we could no longer say. But no matter how hard I tried to hold on to the memories of who we had once been, the reality of what we had become was impossible to ignore. Jake, unaware of the storm that raged just beneath the surface, continued to move through his days with the carefree innocence of childhood. His laughter still filled the air with a warmth that seemed to push back against the shadows that clung to every corner of the house. Yet, even in those moments of light, the weight of what lay beneath the surface was impossible to escape. Each time I watched him race across the soccer field, his eyes alight with determination, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal settle deeper into my chest. The knowledge that the man who stood at the sidelines offering encouragement and praise was the same man who had crossed a line that should never have been crossed was a truth I could not reconcile. The decision I faced weighed heavily on my shoulders, the path ahead shrouded in uncertainty. Part of me clung to the hope that there might still be a way to salvage what remained of our marriage, that beneath the layers of betrayal and broken trust, there might still be a foundation worth rebuilding. But with each passing day, that hope grew fainter, its edges worn thin by the constant reminder of what had been lost. The thought of continuing to share a life with a woman whose choices had torn apart the fabric of our family felt like a betrayal of my own self-worth. Yet, the thought of leaving carried its own kind of pain, the prospect of tearing Jake away from the only life he had ever known weighing heavily on my mind. That I spent countless nights standing at the edge of the backyard, the distant hum of traffic blending with the faint rustle of leaves as I searched the horizon for answers that would not come. The air seemed to carry the echoes of the questions that circled endlessly through my thoughts. Could I forgive Claire? Could I find a way to rebuild the trust that had been broken? And if I couldn't, what would that mean for Jake, for the family we had built together? Each question seemed heavier than the last, their weight pressing against my chest until it became difficult to breathe. Yet, beneath the sorrow and confusion, a quiet determination began to take root, a resolve born not from anger or resentment, but from the need to reclaim the pieces of my life that had been scattered in the wake of betrayal. I knew that no matter how deeply the past had cut, the future was still mine to shape. The choices I made now would not only define the path I walked but would also shape the world that Jake would grow up in. And as much as I wanted to shield him from the pain that had seeped into the walls of our home, I knew that the only way to truly move forward was to confront the truth head-on. The moment of decision came quietly, without fanfare or dramatic revelation. I stood in the doorway of Jake's room, watching as he slept, the soft rise and fall of his breath a reminder of the innocence I was determined to protect. The weight of the past pressed heavily against my shoulders, but as I looked at my son, a sense of clarity began to settle over me. I could not change what had happened, nor could I erase the pain that had been inflicted. But I could choose how to move forward. I could choose to build a future defined not by betrayal, but by strength and resilience. In the days that followed, I began to take the first steps toward that future. I sought out legal counsel, the stark reality of divorce paperwork a tangible reminder of the finality of the path I had chosen. Each signature, each notarized document felt like a nail driven into the coffin of the life we had built together, but with each step, the weight on my chest began to lift, replaced by a sense of agency that I had not felt in weeks. The conversations with Claire were brief and to the point, each word stripped of the emotion that had once bound us together. The house, once filled with the echoes of laughter and shared memories, now stood as a monument to what had been lost, a space that no longer felt like home, and yet, through it all, I found a sense of peace that I had not thought possible. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges I could not yet foresee. But as I packed the last of my belongings into the trunk of my car and turned the key in the ignition, I felt the first stirrings of hope begin to take root within me. The future stretched out before me like an open road, its destination unknown but full of possibilities. And as I drove away from the house that had once been my home, I knew that this was not the end of my story, but the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to create a life defined not by the mistakes of the past, but by the strength of the choices I made moving forward. The day I left felt both heavier and lighter than I had imagined. The suitcase in my hand weighed less than the memories I carried, but every step away from the house felt like peeling away a layer of the life I had built. The air seemed thicker as I walked through the hallway for the last time, each framed photo on the walls echoing with moments I could no longer reclaim. The sound of my footsteps against the hardwood floor seemed louder than usual, as if the house itself was marking my departure. Yet, even as the walls held the echoes of laughter and shared promises, I knew that what had once been a home had become a place of shadows, reminders of trust broken and love lost. Claire stood in the doorway of the living room, her presence a silent testament to everything that had led us here. Her eyes, once familiar and warm, now held a mixture of sorrow and something else, perhaps regret, perhaps resignation. But there were no words left to say. The conversations that might have bridged the distance between us had long since passed, leaving only the silence of a relationship that had unraveled thread by thread. The messages, the stolen glances, the laughter shared with someone else, it all lingered in the air between us, unspoken yet undeniable. Jake's room was the hardest to leave. I paused at the threshold, the faint scent of his favorite blanket still lingering in the air. His toys were scattered across the floor in the organized chaos that only a child could create, each one a reminder of the innocence I was determined to protect. The thought of leaving him behind, even for a few days at a time, carved a deeper ache into my chest than any betrayal ever could. Yet, as much as it hurt to step away, I knew that staying in a house built on broken trust would only teach him lessons I never wanted him to learn. The best gift I could give him now was the example of a father who chose integrity over bitterness, who chose to rebuild rather than remain trapped in the wreckage of what had been lost. Outside, the air felt cooler against my skin, as if the world itself had shifted in the wake of my decision. The sky stretched wide and open above me, the distant hum of traffic blending with the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Each breath felt like a step towards something new, uncertain, yes, but no longer weighed down by the questions that had once held me captive. The future stretched before me like an open road, its twists and turns hidden from view but full of possibilities waiting to be discovered. As I placed the suitcase in the trunk of my car, I paused for a moment, my gaze drifting back to the house one last time. The windows reflected the pale light of the afternoon sun, their glass panes holding no answers, only the reflections of a past that no longer belonged to me. I could still see the echoes of the life we had built together, the late-night conversations, the laughter shared over dinner, the quiet moments when love had seemed like enough to hold the world together. But those echoes now belonged to a chapter that had reached its final page, and no amount of longing could rewrite the story that had led us here. Driving away, the distance between me and the house grew with each mile, yet the weight in my chest began to lift, piece by piece. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt winding through fields and towns that seemed both familiar and foreign. The hum of the engine beneath my hands became a steady rhythm, a heartbeat of movement and momentum that carried me forward into the unknown. Each mile marked a step away from the shadows of betrayal and toward the light of something new, something not yet defined but full of potential waiting to be realized. That I and the weeks that followed, the ache of loss remained, a quiet presence that whispered through the edges of my thoughts. There were moments when the memories returned unbidden, the sound of Claire's laughter, the warmth of Jake's hand in mine, the quiet comfort of a home that had once felt unbreakable. Yet, even as those memories lingered, they no longer held the power to pull me backward. Instead, they became part of the foundation upon which I began to rebuild, a reminder of where I had been and a guidepost toward where I was going. That I learned that healing is not a straight path, but a journey marked by moments of both sorrow and strength. There were days when the weight of what had been lost pressed heavily against my chest, when the echoes of betrayal seemed too loud to ignore. But there were also days when the sun seemed to shine a little brighter, when laughter came more easily, and when the future no longer felt like a question mark but a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Through it all, Jake remained my anchor, the reason I chose to keep moving forward even when the road felt uncertain. His laughter became a beacon of hope, a reminder that love, in its purest form, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Each time I saw his smile, each time I heard his footsteps racing toward me, I knew that the choices I had made were not just for myself, but for him, for the future we would build together, one step at a time. Looking back now, I see that the end of my marriage was not the end of my story. It was a turning point, a moment when the life I had known shattered, but from those broken pieces, I began to shape something new. I learned that strength is not found in holding on to what no longer serves us, but in having the courage to let go and step into the unknown. I discovered that even in the wake of betrayal, there is still room for hope, for love, for laughter, for the possibility of a future defined not by what has been lost, but by what lies ahead. And as I stand here now, with the open road stretching out before me and the sun warm against my skin, I know that this is not the end. It is a new beginning, a chance to write the next chapter of my life with honesty, with courage, and with the unwavering belief that the best is yet to come.